made public so that we could see how much of a discussion took place regarding the concerns at Freddie Mac. And it's a fair request. Those haven't been made available. And so, you know, there are those kinds of issues that need to be talked about more in the press, and they aren't.
Yeah, I think in absolute transparency and fairness, to try to put the debacle of the subprime mess on one person's shoulders is a bit off basis. Rahm Emanuel is not the individual who's responsible for the subprime problem. Rahm Emanuel sat on the board of Freddie Mac, and the board does not make the financial policy decisions for Freddie Mac. In fact, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae buy mortgages from institutions that they have contracted with and has approved. So that's not a Rahm Emanuel's policy.
But shouldn't we have
The minutes?
the minutes? What's wrong with that?
You can have the minutes, but I think
But
No,
we
you
don't.
can't. You
I think
can't
that
have the minutes.
You're slanting what people are doing in the media, or they're slanting it, whether you're for Rahm or you're not for Rahm, or for Del Valle or not for Del Valle. I think the information needs to be transmitted correctly.
Exactly.
And Rahm Emanuel was on the board. He did not make policy decisions for Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac made policies that allowed for companies to participate in the subprime debacle long before Rahm Emanuel was on
But
the
when
board.
you serve on a board, and I'm on a board now, and I've been on many boards, when you serve on a board, you are responsible. You have
policy.
fiduciary responsibility. You are ultimately responsible for policies that get established. Otherwise, why have a board? You don't need a board.
Why be a part of it?
Why, then
Well,
just have an executive director and all the decisions and policies are established at the administrative level. And so I understand your point. It's a valid point. I don't disagree. But if we're going to be transparent, then let's make the minutes available so that we can assess what type of discussions took place regarding those issues, the subprime issues, on the part of the board that was responsible for policy at Freddie Mac.
Well, we're just talking about transparency. It's like when I go to court, oftentimes in bankruptcy court, the judge says transparency, disclosure is what I'm concerned about more than anything else. So,
Another
yeah,
issue that he's in, sometimes on the 9th of this month, headline a story that Valle plans to void the parking meter deal. You have
Well,
any comment on that?
that's because in looking at the contract, we have found that there has been what some would categorize a technical violation, but nevertheless a violation. And we've asked the Attorney General to look at it. And the violation is that there's an ethics ordinance in the city that requires individuals who are representing or have ties to a company, in this case Morgan Stanley, the folks who own the meters, to disclose those ties through the process when a contract is being finalized. This didn't happen. Morgan Stanley indicated that they had no lobbyists involved in the negotiations of the contract for the meter deal. And the fact of the matter is that there were individuals who the city brought in to deal and shape the contract and establish the parameters for the contract that also had ties for Morgan Stanley, and that should have been disclosed. The law requires that disclosure. That's what the ethics ordinance says. And the ethics ordinance says that if that provision is violated, then it is the grounds for voiding the contract. And so I'm asking that the Attorney General look at it. And if that's the case, then we can get Morgan Stanley back to the table, which is what we have to do. Because basically, this meter deal is probably the worst deal that the city has ever entered into. It's a 75-year lease where we gave up our authority to decide where we're going to put bicycle lanes and bus lanes and how many meters we're going to have on the street. Do you know, I'd like to, for example, go back to increasing the number of tickets before you do the booting of the car. It's 2 right now, within 12 months.
Yeah.
I'd like to change that because we are being too harsh. We are being tough, real tough on people in the city of Chicago. It is an oppressive climate. And so I'd like to do that. Do you know that this agreement says that if we do that, in effect then, according to them, we diminish enforcement because we go from 2 tickets to 5 tickets, for example, then we have to reimburse the meter company, because that represents a possible loss of revenue
Revenue to the
for the
meter.
company. What kind of deal is that?
I agree with you. That was absolutely the worst deal I've ever. $1 billion.
It is the worst.
I
It is
think
the
that's
worst
why
deal.
he's running now,
it
because
is the worst.
25 years from now, $1 billion won't be. It's
It's-
like
yeah.
nothing. Like $1 million.
Yeah, the
used to be
million's
a lot of money.
yeah.
Years ago.
Billion's
Now
the new
million's
million.
nothing.
But I
Right.
think the process in terms of how ordinances are introduced and how the legislation is passed in the city council has to also be looked at, because all of that stuff is bundled together, and the city council meets once a month in a city as complex as the city of Chicago is absolutely absurd.
That is an excellent point.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what went wrong here.
Yeah.
The contract was finalized by the city, by the insiders, and then one day, and presented to the council the next day, and voted upon.
Right.
There were no deliberations. You didn't have, the public didn't have a
public,
chance
yeah.
to tear this
Yeah, the same thing with
agreement
the red
around.
light camera
The same thing.
situation, the same thing with the crosswalk.
And thank you for bringing that up. Do you know that in 4 years, we've gone from 2 intersections for red light cameras to 190 intersections? Last year, revenue increased by $20 million. In 1 year, just in red light tickets alone, $100 a ticket. Over 700,000 tickets issued in the city of Chicago. So we went from having a policy that was for the purpose of protecting pedestrians and
To a
reducing
revenue
accidents to doing revenue generating.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
wrong. And
Yeah.
those are the kinds of things we need to change
Yeah.
in the city of
Sure.
Chicago.
Because I think it bypasses the police. It just goes straight to revenue, doesn't it?
That-
It's not
it
a
all
police
goes,
matter.
it all
Yeah.
goes to revenue.
Yeah,
We
it's
don't
not a-
even use any of that money to try and make modifications
Yeah.
of lights at intersections in
Right.
order to make them safer. We just use it to make money.
Or certainly to make them consistent. I mean,
Yeah.
there was one of them, some of the lights in certain wards that have been removed, certainly not in the African-American community on the west and south side. I've been driving the city for the last probably 6 or 7 weeks, just looking at how these lights, the red light cameras, have been
Distributed.
dispersed and
Yeah.
distributed. So I think that, that process certainly needs to be looked at.
Okay.
Right.
You know what? We have a new sponsor that we want to mention on
Oh, yeah.
air. So why don't we do that, and then we'll come back in a sec. Well, no, you just read it.
I got it, right.
Yeah,
Right,
read it,
folks.
Mark. All right,
I'm
let's
Mark
hear it.
Wallace.
We're listening.
Yeah, a good mechanic
Streaming
is hard to
live.
find. For over 15 years, C&J Auto has taken care of all of my automotive repairs. Call Cleveland and John, the auto experts of C&J Auto. They're the best full-service automotive repair and complete paint and body shop I know in Chicago. All of their mechanics are ASE certified, and that's very important because you want to know that the person who's working under the hood of your foreign or domestic car is qualified to do so. Give them a call at 773-264-6070. That's 773-264-6070, and tell them that I told you to call. I have no doubt in my mind that you'll be completely satisfied with their service that you receive from C&J Auto. They've delivered time and time again for me, and I'm sure they'll deliver for you. C&J Auto is located at 707 West 119th Street. That's 707 West 119th Street, just 2 blocks east of Halstead. C&J
All
Auto.
right.
Check 'em out.
C&J Auto, and you said you use them for all of your automotive
For about
needs.
15 years, they've been taking care of all of my
Oh,
automotive.
God. Get an endorsement from Mark Wallace. What
absolutely.
more can you ask for?
All right.
And from the Borges Report. So I will be visiting them myself.
Absolutely.
Okay, so folks, you're listening to the Borges Report. We're here every Sunday from 9 to 10 a.m. following Reverend Jesse Jackson and right before Dr. Terry Mason. So we hope that you tell your friends and family to join us. Today in the studio, we have our city clerk, Miguel de Valle, who is a mayoral candidate, and we were just discussing this debacle with these parking meters, which is the most ridiculous contract I've ever seen, I think, in the history
Absolutely.
of this city or any, maybe other than maybe Halliburton, but short of Halliburton, I think this is it.
It's ranking up
Yeah,
there.
but I
It's
think too that we really have to put an emphasis on our city council to make sure that the city council, if they don't understand something or they're not clear on something, they should not allow for the mayor to just rubber stamp the mayor's
But
policies.
when they're all appointed.
Well, they're
most
not
of
all
the major-
appointed.
I mean,
No,
I mean,
But you have
I'm a little
how many aldermen
exaggeration.
are appointed there?
30% of them,
Well,
30% of the
qu-
aldermen.
quite a
have been-
few, but that,
20-some, yeah.
but let me say that there are quite a few retirements. We
Right.
may get as many as 15 new aldermen, probably more. So this is an opportunity to really change the dynamics in the city
To
council.
return to a strong
And
council?
I want a strong mayor and a strong council. I want the council to be a deliberative body. I want them to assume responsibility for the tough decisions that have to be made. And I want them to cast votes.
Well, let me ask
You
you
know,
this.
it
Let
just-
me ask you this. How difficult would it be to change the policy of how the city council meets on passing ordinances and legislation for the city? I mean, it just, boggles my mind that a city council meets once a month to pass legislation on a city the size of Chicago.
Well, and it's a good point, because one of the things I talk about regularly is how when city council meetings take place, and as you said, once a month usually, and they don't meet during the month of August, those council meetings begin with resolutions that are important because you're honoring the heroic efforts of firefighters and police officers, and and you're
to
honoring
have
any other individuals. But we spend as much as an hour and a half, sometimes even longer. We've spent even longer just dealing with resolutions at the beginning of the meeting. So the citizens who come to a meeting, who want to hear about a particular ordinance, they'll sit there for a couple of hours before you even get to the matter. Folks who are advocating for the Sweet Home Chicago ordinance that still hasn't been addressed to provide money from TIFs for affordable housing, they've been to the city council like 5, 6 times. They've sat there for hours waiting for old business to be called up.
Right.
And then there's a parliamentary maneuver used to postpone after they've sat there for 3 hours. That frustrates the electorate.
Sure.
It frustrates residents. And so there is a need for a change in the process. Of course, the council is an elected legislative body. They establish their own rules. So the aldermen have to decide what rule changes need to be made to change the structure and the schedule of the meetings.
Maybe it should be done by an independent council because, it's like grading your own paper.
Yeah, but how would you do that, though? How would you take
I
that
don't
power
know.
away from the city?
But there is an
legislature?
opportunity with
Yeah.
new aldermen, and
Yeah.
aldermen, there are aldermen who are there, like
Yeah.
Alderman Jackson, who has been there for one term. She understands these things.
Right.
She sees them. And so those aldermen who are incumbents, who are receptive to change,
But do you think
combined
that's-
with the new ones, may be just enough to come up with the majority that we need to make some real changes in the council.
It sounds as if it's purposeful. I mean, as if, well, we know these resolutions are going to take an hour, 2 hours. I mean, it's by design.
Yeah, but a resolution,
so that-
we need to hear a
Well, I
resolution
don't,
by a guy
no,
who's
I'm not
who
saying
saved a
that
cat in a
it should,
tree.
no, I'm just saying I disagree that that kind of time should be spent.
Right,
If, you really have some substantive matters that you need to tend to.
exactly.
So
It shouldn't
I'll-
be done through
but
the
it's-
city council.
Well, the
meeting.
resolutions
Some
could be
people-
done at the end of the
Sure,
meeting
sure.
rather than at the beginning.
Exactly.
I was a member of the General Assembly, the State Senate, for 20 years. We always dealt with resolutions on the calendar at the end of the session day,
Right.
And they're
not at the
largely
beginning.
ceremonial
At the-
anyway,
and-
right?
And they were ceremonial, and they're important. We must
Yeah.
honor our firefighters and our personnel and individuals. Sometimes they're death resolutions. Those are important. We must
Absolutely.
pay tribute to people in the city.
But can't that be
But-
moved to the back
But
end?
That's what you're
exactly,
suggesting, yeah.
exactly. And you still honor people, and you still pay respect, but you do it in an agenda that makes a whole lot more sense for the public, because when we open up our sessions in Springfield, we would start with legislation.
Right.
And people would be in the galleries, and people would have a sense of when a bill was going to be called so that they could be there to hear it. That is not the case in the council. You could
Yeah.
sit there for hours not knowing exactly
there should
when
be
that
some-
business is going to come up.
Perhaps this is an issue for
some-
our community activists.
Yeah.
Again, it's the
I did
government of the
not, I
people.
did not know this. I did not realize this because I really not.
I had not paid much attention
But
to
there
it,
should
but
be
I
some
recall.
triaging,
You're
not
right.
that, as you say, the resolutions are important, but.
Great word,
at the
triage,
end,
you're right.
To triage the meeting of some
So
importance.
community activists, let's petition our aldermen and say, let's get involved.
Yeah,
So,
well,
Yeah, we certainly have to keep pushing this.
well, Mr. Clerk, you have really been a wealth of information and edification to us about many of these things. I'm certain you could talk a lot longer about these issues. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but it has certainly been a distinct pleasure having you here. Good luck to you. Sounds like you have some great ideas and that you could put in place. And we have a number of callers here, but we can't get to you. So,
Let's call them out.
folks, well, we got Marshall, Earl, Don, and Fred. I think